Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the virtual edition of We Robot 2020, the premier international conference on law and policy relating to robotics, hosted this year by the University of Ottawa's Centre for Law, Technology and Society. Before we get started, I need to thank our wonderful sponsors who've been very patient and understanding as we reimagined this year's conference. We Robot 2020 is presented with the generous support of Microsoft, CIFAR, X, and Intel, as well as the University of Ottawa, the University of Washington Technology Policy Lab, and the University of Miami Faculty of Law. For those who are not familiar with the We Robot format, please note that the authors do not present their own work. Instead, session discussants read the author's papers in advance of the conference and present the author's work to the audience while offering constructive thoughts for improvement and seeding the discussion that follows. Authors then have about 5 minutes to respond to the discussant's feedback. Then we invite the discussant and authors to engage in a casual discussion. For the virtual edition, we invite the audience to engage with the papers in the comment section below the video. For this session, we're delighted to welcome our discussant, Hallie Siegel from the University of Toronto Robotics Institute, to present Involving Seniors in Developing Privacy Best Practices Towards Responsible Development of Social Technologies for Seniors. This paper is by Andrea Slane, who is the Associate Dean of Research and Professor in Legal Studies in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at Ontario Tech University, Isabel Peterson, who's also at Ontario Tech University, and Patrick C.K. Hung, who's also at Ontario Tech University. A link to the paper and bios are also available under the video. And with that, I will turn things over to Hallie for her presentation.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's a real honor, actually, to be invited to participate in We Robot. It's a conference that I have been following for a number of years, ever since I really got pulled into the robotics space. My background is neither in law nor in robotics engineering, but in communications and science communications. And I'm really especially interested in the social aspects of robotics and how robots are perceived by the public, by end users, and how they really are a transitionary technology and how we as a society are transitioning alongside with that. So We Robot has always been kind of close to my heart as a conference. And so I'm just thrilled to be here. I also really wanted to thank Jason and Florian for being co-chairs this year. We know that this was a really challenging year for the conference. They had 2 conferences to organize, and of course, we're all disappointed we couldn't attend in person. But in particular, I think missing the opportunity to celebrate in person the life of Professor Ian Kerr, who passed away recently and was one of the co-founders of the We Robot conference. He really was a brilliant scholar. I had the pleasure to meet him in person once, not too long ago, but just found him to be an incredibly generous individual and very inspiring. So I'm thrilled really to be here and hope that we have a chance to, have some time to recognize Ian at some point as part of when the conference all ties together. In any event, this brings me to the topic of today's session, which is participatory robotics design, and the paper by Andrea Slane and her colleagues at Ontario Tech. The title of the paper is Involving Seniors in Developing Privacy Best Practices Towards Responsible Development of Social Technologies for Seniors. Andrea's research question is grounded at the intersection of aging studies and technology privacy. And it seems to be motivated by the desire, 1, to help seniors age in place, so age in their homes or in their communities. 2, to ensure that socially assistive technologies are developed responsibly. And 3, to provide policy direction to Canadian decision makers with respect to governance and regulation of robots and AI. So just trying to give a sense of the context for where the paper is coming from. Now, what is the main research question that the paper asks is, what strategies do seniors currently employ to protect their privacy when using social technologies? And then forward thinking, what knowledge, tools, and supports will they need to protect their privacy if they're going to expand their use to new devices like robots and new functions like conversations and social supports in the future? So what is the methodology? The team used focus groups, surveys, workshops, and media analysis. And they asked older adults recruited from senior day centers to share their ideas about their current experiences with present day technologies like Facebook and potential use of socially assistive robots in the future. So the work was really straddling current and future use. And they were looking across a range of activities that also had spanned quite a distance. Everything from simple tasks like scheduling and reminders to maybe more other simple tasks, but that maybe come with slightly higher risks like online banking and online purchasing, to moderately complex tasks like facilitating communication with family and friends, and also highly nuanced activities like providing conversation, learning, and companionship. So it really stretched the whole gamut of the types of tasks and activities that a robot or socially assistive device might be used for. And there was a particular focus on understanding the trade-offs that individuals make when deciding if a technology is actually worthwhile to use. So by that, they were looking at the magnitude of the benefit that the technologies are offering in relation to the scale of the need that's being met by the user of the users, and also the burdens or friction of using these technologies, like how hard are they to use, how expensive are they, and also balancing this with the privacy risks of using these technologies, because of course privacy is the focus of the paper. So there were many detailed results. They did many focus groups and workshops across the country. I am sure Andrea will tell us exactly how many participants were covered at some point. But in any event, I won't cover all the details. I wanted to give an overview of the range covered by the work. But in terms of overall results, I think that the key things that hit home for me were that, one, seniors are not a cohesive group. That's point number one, and probably the most important point in the paper. They vary greatly in their experience with technology. They vary greatly in their opinions and preferences for how it should be used and when it should be used. They vary greatly in their privacy concerns. And they also vary greatly in their level of privacy knowledge, both in terms of how the technology works and also what privacy laws are there to protect them. And so as a result, like other adults, they need to make their own highly individual risk trade-offs when it comes to deciding whether or not to use a technology for a specific use. And as a result, they need a variety of supports and tools to meet their needs. So there is no one size fits all. Now, despite all the individual aspects of it, and all these individual needs, there are some generalizations that can be made about seniors and older adults. Now, the first is that, like other adults, they value their privacy. They're really no different on that front. And though they acknowledge that some seniors may have cognitive issues or special needs, they uniformly resent being framed as vulnerable or technologically helpless. Again, I think like many of us may feel that as well. And they prefer simple, straightforward, in-person support for technology and education when it comes to protecting their personal information and learning how to use these technologies safely. But overall, they're interested in adopting technologies that actually meet their needs. So needs would be a primary. If the need isn't there, it's not something that they're going to adopt. And lastly, and I'll point out that they, though it wasn't explicitly addressed in the research questions, one theme that came out quite strongly was that participants voluntarily brought forward significant ethical concerns regarding anthropomorphic social support technologies. And so some of these concerns included the devaluing of caregivers, and also the problem of inauthentic interaction, or the idea that social robots might actually have the perverse effect of making social isolation worse by having people rely on the robot rather than seeking out human companionship and contact. So Just to reiterate again, the overall results, seniors are not a cohesive group. They have a lot of individual needs. But one thing we can say for sure is that they resent being labeled as vulnerable or technologically helpless. And they have real needs and concerns and want to be heard about those, much like other people. So what makes the study of seniors' privacy in the context of socially assistive robots especially challenging? I think there are two key issues that are somewhat intertwined. The first one is the work is really at the intersection of multiple transitions. We have technological transition, there's a generational transition, there's also cognitive transition that's happening. And the work is really trying to address thorny issues that overlap all of these areas. Seniors represent a remarkable generation who have experienced technology and transition from print to digital to now robots. So this is the generation of seniors that we're seeing. Generational transition, as Canada's baby boomers, they represent about 20% of the population. They're entering into their senior years and they're bringing with them changes to culture, to our values, at the same time as the technology is transitioning. And indeed, the authors noted that some participants saw themselves as members of a transitional generation that sometimes embraces technology, sometimes rejects it, and sometimes prefers non-technical means of performing tasks and getting support. And at the same time, seniors also have to acknowledge the realities of cognitive transition, which can happen to varying degrees and in varying dynamics as people age. And so the idea of, for instance, conditions like dementia, it's not like a step ladder of cognitive decline. We have good days, we can have bad days, we have elements that we can manage well, elements that we can't manage well, and these things are changing constantly. So that creates a very complex reality when trying to manage things from a technical perspective, when the context is changing so quickly. I'd like to sort of delve into this last point around cognitive transition a little more, because I felt that the fear of loss, i.e. loss of control, loss of independence, loss of privacy, loss of meaningful relationships, seems to be the iceberg that was lying below the surface of this research. Andrea, you were quite explicit in saying that the general values of privacy were difficult to talk about with seniors, and it was much easier to speak around specific instances. But it seems to be that fear is part of what this overall concern around privacy is being driven by. When it comes to the usefulness of social robots, participants alluded to other seniors who might need some support, or maybe their future selves, but they seemed really reluctant to discuss the issue of fear directly. Now, I realize that wasn't necessarily part of the research designed to tackle that, but I felt that this was an emotion that was really bubbling under the surface that would be really interesting for future research. Now, it's really challenging to get people to talk about their own future. You spoke about this in the paper, but in particular when it comes to the loss of cognitive capacity and control. And I think the challenge is that privacy is so intimately linked to control in independence and relationships. So there are these moving parts in the paper. We have relationships with family, relationships with doctors, relationships with friends that need to be maintained, and we're asking robots to do that. We have questions of how much information is shared and with whom. And so social interaction really is at the core. This was raised with respect, again, this concern around anthropomorphism and placing the robot as a social entity in and of itself, as opposed to facilitating. And so I think when we looked at the different use cases that you had, they really struck the range of facilitating communication versus being the subject of communication. But I find when we think about privacy, it's very linked to these factors, and dependency without meaningful social connection, we actually have a name for that. It's called neglect. And privacy without meaningful social connection, we have a name for that too, and it's called isolation. And I think that these things, neglect and isolation, are the things that people fear the most, and is what makes it so challenging to address privacy needs directly, in particular in respect to this context. So I'm wondering if there might be value in exploring these links in future research. I'd like to end on the note of perhaps future area for literature review, or looking for design methods. You mentioned in your paper that one of the challenges was designing the workshops and figuring out how to elicit the kinds of responses that would give you the detailed privacy needs that you were looking for and what the underlying factors were. And I had wondered if there might be value in looking at foresight methods and also inclusive design methods. And I think you may find some value there. Foresight is a participatory practice of studying the future, and it does so from multiple points of view. And its goal is not to predict what is going to happen, but to understand how the actions and decisions that we make today actually help to shape our collective future. So it's really a vision building process that is about enabling collective decision making and joint action. So it has a participatory edge to it that I think is underlying, when I go back to the title of your research, is I think underlying your intent. As a result, it really invites us to consider the future as something that we can co-create, and rather than just accept. And I think one thing that's interesting about the law and regulation is that we seem to have, it's often reactionary, and what foresight asks us to do is to embed, to feed forward instead of feedback. So embed the conversations around regulation, privacy, and law right at the beginning of the design process, not just the design of privacy laws, but the design of the technology itself. And so rather than reacting to robots that someone else designs for seniors, the seniors are involved in the process of actually designing the use cases, designing how the robots work and what the interfaces are like. Which leads me to the second area that I think is worth looking into in terms of workshop methodology, is the area of inclusive design. There is the principle of inclusive or participatory design is really about designing for the edge case. So you're designing for the exception, and if you design for the edge, or if you design for the exception, everybody in the middle naturally winds up getting taken care of. So that's the principle of inclusive design. And I think that regulators have to understand that the answer isn't to design privacy laws or best practices just for seniors' use of these technologies, but really to include seniors' varying needs and other populations or traditionally excluded needs in the privacy laws that are made for everyone. It's in privacy, it's by stretching these practices to include the needs of everyone that you wind up encompassing more needs in the fundamental system design, and that the underlying architecture of that protective system is actually more flexible and future-proof. So if there's a challenge with technology, it's said, oh, it's always trying to catch up to, regulation is always trying to catch up to fast-moving innovation. If we have, if we can design from a principles-based approach, and I think regulators need to understand that if we can design the regulations from a principle-based approach that really encompasses a wider variety of needs, it really in many ways becomes more flexible and more future-proof. So I'll leave it at there, and I'd love to hear from Andrea.
Okay. So thank you so much for all of that. That was very, very interesting to hear somebody else describe the project. It's a really great structure for an event like this, and you've done a fantastic job. It sounds so much more coherent than it does in my own mind. So that's really great. I should say, because this was really the first foray that our team has made into studying seniors as a population that is being targeted very much by technology developers who are seeing a market out there that is growing and that is potentially really lucrative for them as far as they can imagine. So for this study, we did choose to focus on that bridge between the current use and the potential future use that was in the near future, because these are products, we were able to show them some videos of products that are either on the market or close to on the market, not necessarily going to be successful because we're sort of right at the beginning of that kind of curve. And there have been other products out there that have not succeeded. But it's an interesting moment, for robot developers, to sort of try and, ride this kind of wave that they're anticipating. And then to ask seniors about, how they feel about, being at that point on that curve. And there were, you did a beautiful job of conveying the complexity of the many things that we ended up talking to them about. And there were quite varied reactions, although I think most of them quite firmly were like, no, this type of device is not for me, right? Like, this is not, I don't see myself running out there to purchase this thing, right? Like, which is sad news, I guess, for the developers. But we're all in this kind of complex journey, through those various transitions that you so beautifully described. They're personally in a set of transitions, but we're all sort of going through this time frame where we don't know exactly how long it's going to take or if it's going to ever come to fruition. This sort of vision of the future where robots are in people's homes in a way that that is more commonplace. So I really appreciated being able to talk to these groups of seniors, and they were all very able-bodied, able-minded people. The age range was what we were looking for pretty much. We were some up, up into those in their 90s, but they were all very very able and still coming to sort of day activities at the senior center and stuff like that. So I think for sure one of the things that I've done, since the COVID situation hit, right when I was writing up this paper, I think I sent this paper in, and I had to do some other things for the Office of the Privacy Commission that funded the project, which had to be due by the end of March. And then since then, it's been COVID, right? So I have another thing that I did as a kind of follow-up before processing this. I'm in the midst of doing another sort of data collection about seniors' experiences with technology under COVID as a means of social connection. So, there you have an external event that all of us have been completely sort of thrown by, but having to rely quite a lot more on technology, including what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a particular senior center that I'm working, a group of senior centers that that has been trying to do a lot of this, and I'm sure all across the world, there's been senior serving organizations that have been trying to employ technology to help mitigate social isolation. So it has meant that seniors who were maybe not inclined to use some of these technologies before have had to think about using them or acquire the skills to use them, including seniors that are vulnerable, like ones that are in programs that are meant to provide support because they are experiencing dementia or other forms of cognitive decline. So I'm trying to sort of work all of that into this sort of way of thinking about, what is this sort of fluid movement that we're experiencing that includes things like these shocks, like the COVID situation, where we don't know, whether or not this will be a big boom for robots is unclear. It has been for social connection in a way that may influence. We were seeing already in this study that there was, a lot of bleed over between people's opinions about the technologies that they use right now, and how they imagined that kind of experience transferring to a future technology. Although I would say another interesting thing was also that if we didn't show videos in the workshops, we showed them in the focus groups. So in the focus groups, they had a material item that they could look at and say, oh, well, I like that one. I don't like that one. I like this feature. I don't like that. When I didn't show any videos and just said, imagine a robot that, can have like pretty good conversational capabilities, could, be able to carry out some of the things that none of them can currently really do. Then they were actually more favorable towards those ideas, like that sort of idealized future projection was something that then they could also imagine that there would be better safeguards in place, or we could imagine that they could trust, maybe a company that was, producing these items in a way that would be workable for them. So, I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening with these various trajectories, and I feel like I'm really just at the beginning of this, research journey into figuring all this out.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you raised COVID. I didn't want to bring it up in the presentation because I wanted to focus on the contents of your paper. And in fairness, COVID happened after. So, but I'm really glad you brought it up because, in fact, it's highly relevant to your paper. The reality is, I actually just completed a survey of, how robots are being used in the pandemic. And it's clear that it's accelerating the use and experimentation, in particular with, robots that were already in use, of course, are continuing to be used and will be put into more use. But we're also seeing a number of, I would say, prototypes or almost ready products or in development projects that are being flung into use without necessarily a lot of understanding about how useful they're going to be or what the risks may be. And so there are definitely concerns there. And, and so if we ask, who is the audience for your research, it would appear to be both, as you mentioned, robotic developers, companies that are interested in investing in this space and who see business opportunity. But then on the other hand, in the context of COVID and nursing homes and the issue of maintaining social connection in the context of a pandemic, we also see that it might be nursing homes that are looking, as you said, to embrace these technologies to help facilitate family connections. It could be insurance companies. There are a whole number of actors who I think are interested in and paying a lot of attention suddenly to something that seemed rather far-fetched, just as a pandemic seemed a little far-fetched a few months ago. I think social robots in particular, seemed a little far-fetched to a lot of people, and suddenly we're seeing them used. I think it's really important to draw attention to also the range of ability that they have, and that it's sometimes hard to tell when we use the term social robot what exactly we mean. Is it, is it to facilitate connection? Because robots that have a video screen on them and help you maybe have some voice interaction and help you connect, but it's essentially like a roving iPad. That's relatively simple technology. Robots that can have sophisticated conversations with you or help you, around the house. These are still, although we may see some products that are marketed to be able to do those things. The reality is they're not really there yet. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder too how much one of the challenges I think of having these conversations is educating people on where the technology actually is and what's the difference between what might be and what is actually possible now. Did that seem to be an issue in with your workshop participants? How did you navigate that?
Well, yeah, the workshops were especially challenging, partly because there was not a lot of baseline sort of knowledge about data protection and like sort of how that works and the various principles at play. So I felt like, and I want to do another version of this. Like I want to do it better sort of next time, right? Like, so whether that involves, doing some kind of educational component first, or some kind of like, learning activity first, and then sort of looking at, how they might apply some of those principles in relationship to technologies. I'm working that out because I think it wasn't as successful as I would have liked the way that I did it, which was really trying to say, again, there's a present technology that many of them were familiar with, maybe not directly, but through like, their children or their grandchildren, digital assistants, like an Alexa or a Google Home or something like that, one that they could have a voice interaction with that has a persona behind it. And then imagine that sort of mapped onto a future that has a robot body that would be potentially, mobile or potentially, constant, with some kind of more physiological kind of presence. So it has gestures, it has maybe a face, maybe emotional expression of some sort. So I tried to like get them to think, okay, so what are your concerns when you're just talking to a voice interactive assistant like we have now? And people were familiar certainly with the ones also on their phones like Siri and things like that. And, how does that relate then if you think about this future moment where you have, a more embodied kind of entity? And I want to take that further as well, because there are some projects out there that are using avatars. So they're not like a physical item that they would have in their house, but they're still an entity that they're interacting with in a virtual kind of environment. Sometimes through, headsets, sometimes it's just like on their tablet, like you said, it can be something that's more familiar in terms of the technology that they use to interact with that avatar. So I'm moving kind of in that direction with trying to get them to, to think about, what the anthropomorphic part of it has to do with their level of concern or trust, or, what their sense is about, if there's additional vulnerabilities that come in when you have an interaction with an entity that is, and many of them had heard of problems with security around Alexas and, eavesdropping and surveillance issues. And that, certainly colored their trust in being able to even think about, similar kinds of capabilities in another device that was, even more anthropomorphic. So I'm working that out in terms of how to get like a workshop that would, be meaningfully helping them to sort of grasp some of these sort of complex issues around like how to properly protect yourself and feel confident in being able to use. And I totally agree, like the sort of inclusive design approach and forecasting and all of that it will need to be part of it. And I'm hoping to be able to do that in these next sort of iterations. I've got two simultaneously running projects, one about the COVID impact on technology use for social connection. And then I have another robots project that I'm doing. I'm getting the research ethics approval for now because I have to do it remotely still. But all of these things are things that I feel like I still need to work out to get really the quality of data from them that will help inform these kinds of practices in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I didn't have time really to touch on in the initial presentation, but I'd love to chat with you about is it seemed that in the course of the research, you had participants either develop a persona or walk a persona through, or you also created personas representing different types of workshop participants. And I thought that was interesting from like really from a design perspective. So one of the questions as a designer you might ask is, like, especially with future oriented stuff. So in foresight, you often might ask, there's a technique called backcasting where you envision a future state and you look at the present, and then you ask yourself, what would have to be true in order for that future state to happen? And you might do that with both undesired futures and also desired futures. So I'm thinking of the problem of, like, what would have to be true for seniors to safely expand their use of age-in-place technologies? Because that, as a developer, I would want to know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if you want to prevent seniors from doing it, that's one thing. But if you are a stakeholder actively invested in this, the assumption is you want them to continue to adopt these technologies. So what would have to be true for that to work? And I think from there, you might ask yourself, like, okay, well, how might privacy controls actually be tailored to seniors' individuals' needs? Because we identified that they're all very different. So, first I'm saying what would have to be true for them to use the technologies. Now I'm saying, okay, well, if that's the case, how would we have to tailor these devices so that they could match the individual independence levels and education levels and technology interests and all of that? And then, okay, if you're going to match, then how would you do that tailoring? You would first have to identify and categorize all the different levels of cognition and how those map on to different levels of technology experience and how those map on to different needs areas. And you'd also have to be able to assess any individual on the fly so that you could adapt the technology to that person. That's if you're taking a platform-based approach, which, like our phones or these sort of general purpose robots would have to be able to do those things. If they're not being designed for some very specific use case, they would have to be able to adapt and assess to the needs of the person through a very simple process. And so that gets you down to, okay, back to personas. How do we assess and categorize these needs? Can we create profiles that include the different dimensions and map them? And I can almost see like a series of spider maps or something where you have your different dimensions going off and you can develop different profiles. Here's a person with low cognitive ability or variable cognitive ability with high interest in using robots and low understanding of privacy issues and whatever the other factors are. And now I have to provide, because you can't really develop guidelines without first profiling and assessing people. So I think that there's a need, coming back to the idea of personas, it's a technique used in design quite a lot, is to create personas that encompass these different profiles and then designed for a variety of different user types. And I feel like your work is starting to get there, but it's not that would be like a next step. I feel like if you could do a next step of synthesis in your work, you might be able to begin to extract some quite useful profiles that represent the range. And again, I would focus on the outer range of abilities, because if you're doing inclusive design, if you can meet the needs of the edge cases, the middle gets looked after. So it's not that you have to develop assessment or like tools for every single case, but can you figure out what are the edge cases and then design for those? I feel like your research is close to being able to create that first level of category or off of which you could begin to do assessments. And the assessments themselves might be useful even for future research as you then decide, okay, I want to understand this cohort better. I can use this assessment as a workshop survey tool to help me with my recruiting. So it can be used in quite a lot of different ways. And I feel like that could be quite a useful kind of practical step to take.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I am trying now also to get at that sort of more edge case thing via caregivers. I've got another sort of dimension of the next study that interviews caregivers, and also especially because there are seniors who are caregivers, right? Like they have parents, they're in their 70s, their parents are in their 90s or whatever. And so they're both, thinking about their own situation and they're thinking about, their parent who is at a further stage along in the aging process. So trying to think about that, and also especially because many of the day centers also have programs specifically for seniors with dementia, that are sort of caregiver relief programs, and sort of engagement activities, like different sorts of things. So my focus has continued to be on people who are trying to age in place, right? Like you said. So it's basically this sort of model about, how to work technology into people's regular lives in their homes, more so than a nursing home type situation or retirement living
And
center.
I'm really glad you raised caregivers, and and some people think that, oh, well, that's family members, but actually it also includes personal service workers. It may include palliative doctor or nurse coming in. It may include Meals on Wheels or a physiotherapist. And I think it's really important, not just for seniors, but really often anybody also in the medical system. We tend to think, I think it's really important to take a broad view of who the stakeholders actually are. Very often, it's the ancillary services actually get completely left out of research, when in fact they're often the hidden and almost primary or essential caregivers. It's the person who delivers that hot meal and shows up at the person's home every day, is actually a regular, maybe even a more regular point of contact than a family member or a doctor who's seen. Those stakeholders are more visible. Mm-hmm. So the hidden, and again, back to this idea of inclusive design, we're always asking who's not at the table, who's not here, and we have to keep asking that question, whose view isn't heard, because if you leave that out, you're almost always missing an important part. And it's again, it's usually the people who are excluded who wind up often having to bear the brunt of fixing the problem. So we don't want a technology that just simply shifts the burden from out of the stakeholders that we care about onto some other stakeholder who we choose, or by neglect, have invisible. We want to make sure that we pull all those stakeholder views in, so that system we design, and it's harder to do up front, but in the end, there's a more robust, adaptive, and flexible system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also appreciate that there's a lot of value in continuing to include the direct views of people with dementia, for instance. It's important to sort of keep that in play, that people don't just completely lose their ability to sort of participate in research just because they have a condition like that. And so, some sort of way in which to sort of include their views along with the views of those that are in their lives on a daily basis, to sort of figure out, what the design might better look like and what those safeguards would need to be. Because some of the seniors were like, oh, I'm not techie savvy, so like I let my grandson program my phone. I don't even think about it anymore. Some people do that, but other people are like, like I don't want to turn over. At the same time, they're very guarded about certainly their finances and a lot of their sort of more sensitive information, and concerns about that sort of becoming something that's misused against them. So I think they're like thinking about the different types of relationships that are involved in a person staying in their home for as long as possible, and the degree to which they can maintain autonomy and their ability to make their own choices is a really interesting and important thing to continue to take a closer look at. So thank you for that.
I feel like I had a million other things I wanted to bring up, but right now my mind is drawing a blank. That's the part you can edit out. I think there's one thing I wanted to say. I was listening recently to a podcast about assisted suicide, which in Canada it was an international broadcast, but Canada was raised as having been very sort of innovation forward on this front, with recent laws adopted to allow this assisted suicide and making that a choice. And I was thinking about this in the context of innovation. One of the points that was raised in the podcast was it's all well and good to give people that freedom of choice, as long as and only when there are the additional supports also in place to protect people from it being misused. So we have to value, you can't have assisted suicide when you live in a culture where people only value you for your economic contribution, for example. Because as soon as you are no longer contributing, then there's always the risk that you may be pressured, for instance. There's so many, I'm not going to delve into that weedy territory, but I'm bringing it up as an analogy because I think we often rely on innovation, or especially technology innovation, to solve a problem for us. And especially with respect to this idea, and it comes back really to these concerns around isolation versus, like, what is the function that the robot is serving? And is it to facilitate communication? Is it to be a companion? Regardless of what its use is, if the other supports aren't there, there is no way that any good is going to come of the technology. It will only wind up, as I mentioned earlier, in neglect and isolation. It becomes the excuse or the means by which those things happen. And so if we're going to, I'm pointing it out because I think the answer to the problem is often not a technology issue. The answer is, like, great to use robots, but it doesn't devolve us from the responsibility of maintaining social connections, of ensuring that people are cared for. Those things will continue to be necessary regardless. And until we have addressed those issues, the technology, it really can't move forward, I think, in a healthy way. And so the law and regulation needs to be addressed in that area before it can really be meaningfully forwarded in the technology space. And I think that's just incredibly central. And I don't want to be distracted. Technology is exciting and there's bells and whistles, but we can't be distracted from what is the real purpose it's trying to serve. And maybe we should be working over here too.
Yeah. Well, one of the most enlightening conversations I had was with Kirsten Doughtenhan, who's at Waterloo. And she was saying, that she had long held, this ethical position that, one of the primary tenets of robots is that you always have to have the user be aware, that they are communicating with a robot, right? Like that's one of the things that's an important way to sort of preserve human autonomy, is to sort of make sure that robots are always announced as that. And then she started doing this project that was about working with seniors with dementia. Mm-hmm. Where, the question was whether they really continued to understand that, when they were having conversations with an artificial intelligence. But then at the same time, talking to caregivers, and in this case, I think they were mostly, they were either family caregivers or other sort of, constant supports of some sort, that they were very enthusiastic about the option of having a robot doing conversation with the person that they were caring for, because of the repetitive nature often of those conversations and how they can sort of go on for long periods of time, which the caregiver felt like they didn't have the time to sit there and do in a way that the robot could. So it was like raising a whole bunch of ethical questions for her in a way that was not simple. It wasn't just like, okay, I have this principle and I'm going to stick with it, because now you're in a situation where it could be helpful for a person who is in that kind of state where they want to talk quite a lot, and it's hard to find a human who's going to sit there and engage with them to the extent that they would like. And that does not necessarily mean that the robot is replacing the human in a way that we often talk about it. either instead it's like augmenting the sort of care environment. There's a couple of different dimensions to it, and that would be part of it. But I totally appreciate that's a very important point. It is a system, and it has to be a system. It can't just be, here you have a device, plug it in, it's going to do its job, end of story. It's like part of a very importantly complex social system.
Yeah, it's actually, as you're talking, it reminds me, I saw a presentation recently by one of our faculty at U of T Robotics Institute, Jose Zarifa, and he was presenting on different, his background is on rehab robotics. Sometimes it's interesting to pluck something from another area and see how it runs through here. And really spoke about how the models of rehab, and he's speaking about physical rehab, but how the models of rehabilitation really impact the rehab experience, and also that different models are needed for different types of injury and also different phases of recovery. And so sometimes you might need like a propping up, other times you might need a resistance training. And those are like really different modes of design and very different styles of robot, and yield very different results. And I think that could be a really interesting element too, in terms of looking at these devices as in a therapeutic way, which is I think how Kirsten was talking, and how you've been addressing. I think it also brings up, you mentioned, ethical concerns, and I right away was thinking, yeah, like what are the issues? And you probably have more experience than I do, but I imagine it's not easy to recruit people with dementia and get that through an ethics review. And so this presents another challenge from a design perspective. How can you be meaningfully inclusive of people with all kinds of different backgrounds if on the one hand, we can't be too worried about using them as research subjects because we actually need them. And on the other hand, we have to be very careful about using them as research subjects because we know that comes with a whole host of issues too. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that and what your experiences are. Actually, have you had the opportunity to recruit people? And what is it like trying to get this kind of research pushed through an ethics review?
So I did not do that for the study that's the subject of this paper. I chose to, because it's the first time I was talking to seniors, I chose, able seniors who just completely, were able to consent, and we're not really vulnerable. The types of questions we were asking were not ones that made them expose particularly personal things. The next study, so the one on COVID, I am in part focusing on a couple of different populations, and one is the seniors that are enrolled in an adult day program that they do require extra support. And it's been, their caregiver is usually involved because they're both registered with the center, the caregiver and the senior. And then the senior who's in the day program gives assent. So it's not somebody else is making the decision and you just have to follow. So the Research Ethics Board was okay with that, so that there was somebody who was for sure able to consent in the sort of legally, binding kind of way, the caregiver usually, and then you get assent from the participant themselves, saying, yes, I understand this is a research study. I'm interested in talking to you today. And so you do that. They don't get all the nitty gritty of how your data is going to be protected and the confidentiality and all those sorts of things. Unless they want it, then you can sort of give them a little bit more of that. So that has worked out, and it's been interesting to talk to the people, like you said, in terms of the sort of other people at the table, the people who work with the senior centers, they're, on the ground, frontline, like trying to figure out, because they love engaging with seniors and they want to find ways to do it well. So they've been trying all kinds of things in the last few months to try and keep that contact going, because they know they're a really important sort of social service for seniors, and that without that, seniors do get isolated and do get depressed and disconnected. So the day programs have been doing things like besides just phone calls on a daily basis, they also have been doing some things with conference calling, because Zoom and things like that is a bit too complicated for that population. But they've got platforms, where they can call the person, like every day at 11 o'clock, we have a call, and there's 5 people that are on the call, and you can at least sort of chat. And so things like that, I think, like talking to the senior center staff is also something that will be helpful to sort of figure out the best ways to communicate with people who are in the day programs, because they have a lot of experience trying to figure that out themselves. And I'm finding that the research ethics will listen to that kind of rationale. Like, this is something that has been tried, that works, and this is an important population to talk to. So, yeah.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
So I think I'm aware of the time. Obviously, it's the hardest part of my job in these kind of situations is cutting off a conversation that I feel is just engaging and could go on and on and just bring more and more interesting things to light. In this case, I think we'll have to wait until the videos are posted, and hopefully, given that there's more research coming out and that you've raised so many and touched on so many interesting interesting kind of threads that this paper has raised, and raised just in a really thought-provoking way. I think we'll have to wait until the comments, start seeing the comments come in, hopefully, in the on the videos once they're posted. So I just, before we wrap up, I want to thank Andrea and your co-authors for what is clearly a thought-provoking paper. Hallie, for providing just such a wonderful assessment. I love, in discussion of the paper, I love hearing these interdisciplinary kind of worlds coming together. This is what We Robot's all about. So I think this was just a perfect example of what we hope to achieve in this conference, and what you've certainly both helped us to achieve today. So at that, I will say thank you to both of you, and we will sign off there, I guess.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, Andrew. It was a pleasure to read your paper and have somebody so thoughtfully engaged in what's really an important topic for the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Hallie, for your very insightful and helpful comments about what to do next, because this is, like I said, the beginning of a research journey. So I'm really happy for this intervention and the suggestions. So thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you to the organizers, for sure. You guys are great.